This is Scraps from GriffinMods with our mod guide for the new NERF Elite Retaliator. This is already a very impressive sidearm in its stock form, so I can't wait to see how it performs after it's been modified. In this video we're going to be covering AR removal, we're going to increase the spring tension a little bit, and also remove some of the dead space in the plunger tube. But first thing you need to do is remove all the screws. It's pretty much the same as a Recon in terms of where the screws are at. You've got 2 screws here in the back end, which I've already removed. All the rest of the screws are pretty much the same size, except for this one really long one down here and the 2 smaller ones up here in the tactical rail. It's also important to note that you need to move this back just a little bit to get at these 2 screws here in the front. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all those now, and I'll be right back. I've gone ahead and removed all the screws as well as the top half of the blaster so that we can start talking about the internals. This is the infamous Elite spring that everybody's been trying to find a combination or a replacement for. Now it's been theorized that a Stampede or Nightfinder spring could work. This is a stock Stampede spring. You can see the diameter is a bit bigger. If you really wanted to use this spring, you could probably file down or Dremel out the ribs on the inside of the end cap here. But I think you would still run into issues with the coils themselves not being able to clear the trigger catch in the blaster. Not to mention the fact that the Stampede spring is not as strong as the stock spring that's already in the Retaliator. Now this is an aftermarket Orange Modworks Stampede spring. It's a 6 kilo. I think the diameter is just a little bit smaller, but again you would run into the same issues with having to Dremel out the ribs and having clearance issues with the trigger catch. Something else I wanted to point out is that when the blaster is primed and the plunger rod is fully extended, this area here in the end cap, it's an area of probably just under an inch, is the total area available for the compressed spring. So especially with the combinations of springs, if they're not able to compress down to that area of less than an inch, you're not going to be able to get your trigger catch to engage, and you're going to have serious issues when trying to fire your blaster. We'll talk a little bit more about our solutions to the spring problem here in a minute. First I'm going to start deconstructing the blaster and talking about some of the other mods we're going to do. I'm going to take out the trigger catch. This trigger catch is made out of a slightly stronger plastic than the trigger catch in the Recon, as well as I believe the catch spring is a little bit better. I'm also going to take out the trigger just by lifting it out and sliding it backwards here. The plunger tube comes off by just sliding it off the back of the breech. And then you can remove the bolt sled assembly by just sliding it back and lifting it out. You can see there is an air restrictor in here, so we're going to be drilling that out. This first lock here is your sled lock. I'm going to leave that in. This other skinny one here in the front is your clip lock, and I'm going to take that out so that I can remove or slap in the magazines while the breech is closed. I'm also going to take out the jam door by just lifting it off, and I don't think I'm going to be putting that back in either. So let's go ahead and talk about the plunger tube and what we're going to be doing to it for a second. This is the closed form of the stock plunger tube. So you can see from where the O-ring is here, all this dead space that's here in the front. And if I turn it this way, you can see just how much dead space is in the inside of that plunger tube. So we're going to definitely try to address that issue. To get your plunger rod out of the plunger tube, you just angle it slightly and you can pull it out. Now if you look at the end, you'll notice it's quite different than the plunger face of the current in-strike blasters. Now the reason that is because the back of the breech itself actually goes in there and pushes the plunger back and then catches it on the catch spring before it moves back forward. So we're going to use some hot glue and fill in some of the area around that cross there, but we actually don't want to build it up too much because it'll cause issues with the ability to prime your blaster. So you can't fill that in all the way unless you're planning on cutting down the length of your breech, which I don't recommend without doing some serious reinforcement. Now, part of the reason that the plunger can't close all the way is this small ring you can see on the inside of the plunger tube. Now, the best way that I've decided to get around that is by filing down the edge of the plunger face here just after the O-ring by just a little bit. And you're going to want to be careful not to file it down too much or you'll lose your O-ring when you prime the blaster, but I think by filing it down just a little bit we can get it to clear that space and close all the way. So between that and the little bit of filler we're putting in there, I think that'll solve a lot of the dead space issue. Something else to address is, because this is going to be moving further forward than it does in its stock form, the spring is not long enough to reach all the way when it's closed. It'll only reach to about there. So I'm going to be building up some hot glue on the back of the plunger face the same way that we did in the Rampage, to help the reach of that spring, and I'm going to build it up just a little bit further for some added compression and see what that does to our ranges. So I'm going to go ahead and make those modifications right now, and I'll be right back with you. So I went ahead and drilled out the air restrictor with my Mondo drill bit here, and you can see that we have a nice clean hole running through the breech. For the plunger rod, I took a coarse grain sanding bit for my Dremel, and I took just a little bit off the edge here without taking off too much that we have to worry about losing the O-ring when we prime the blaster. Now if you look in here, I've taken some hot glue and filled in each of these voids around the cross. I decided against using the craft foam for the simple fact that this area never receives any impact force, and I didn't think it was necessary. For the back of the plunger face, I've added the hot glue here. I've decided the perfect size is a 1/2 inch, because you've got an inch tolerance in the back of the blaster, and the Elite spring compresses down to just under a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch for the glue seems to work out just perfectly. Normally I'll build it up beyond a 1/2 inch, and then I'll cut it down to just the size that I need it, and that also provides a nice even flat area for the spring to rest on. I'm going to go ahead and put it together now and show you how it works. I want to point out that in its stock form, you could close this system all the way, but it would require more pressure than the blaster put out on its own. I've assembled this by hand at this point and seen how it works completely assembled with the spring and checked the clearances, and there is now, between the added spring tension, the removal of the air restrictor, and shaving down that lip, plenty of force to close this all the way every time it fires. There's still just a little bit of resistance at the end. That comes from the O-ring hitting that lip on the inside, but it's nothing that the blaster can't overcome on its own. And if you look inside here, you can see the amount of dead space is far less than it was in the stock form of the blaster, which I hope is going to translate to some really impressive ranges. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and lube up the plunger system with some white lithium grease, put it all back together, and we'll see how it fires. This is our range test for our modified Retaliator. These are stock Elite darts. We're going to start out with level shots and then do some angled shots. And now some angled shots. So those ranges were looking pretty good. A couple of them veered off. They might do just a little bit better with the barrel extension, but let's see where they landed. So here we have the beginning of our grouping of level shots. This is 47 feet, and I've got two right here at 50 feet. I've got one more, and then I've got one here at 54 feet, one at 60 feet, and looks like our last level shot is at 63 feet. For our angled shots, looks like we've got one here at 84 feet, that's two at 84 feet, and then I've got at 91 feet, there's 1, 2, and 3. This third dart is sitting at 95 feet. Here's the end of our tape, and I've got two more darts sitting past 100 feet, and that's out of a pistol. So really great ranges. I think removing some of the dead space for the plunger tube was really helpful, and I may even go back and do that now with the Rampage and see if that pushes the ranges out any farther. So Really happy with these ranges, and thanks for watching.